Hi, my name is Alan Marshall, and welcome to my fieldwork assignment number 3 for philosophy of art. Um, our assignment was to basically watch a movie and find 2 to 3 professional reviews and 2 to 3 amateur reviews about the film, and compare and contrast them with our own experience watching the film. The first reviewer that I found was Anthony Lane, and let me just start by saying he actually liked the movie. But when I was reading his review, I discovered that this was more of like describing character and its relation to other films, as and not so much reviewing the actual film. So I wrote Lane describes characters in an interesting way using basically the diction of a critic. So the way he described these characters was very language like. He was using a lot of language words that people don't typically use when describing something. And it made me think of, in today's class discussion, about the inexperienced wine taster not having many things to say about the wine, but an experienced wine taster would have a lot more to say about it. Me, I'm not a movie reviewer. I just like movies, and I have a general idea of what makes a good movie and what doesn't make a good movie. And this person just has a different taste in movies, I guess, relating to the lesson. Also, he seems to be okay with unanswered questions, like in the beginning of the movie when the witch was rubbing the baby parts on her and making herself young again. I sat there and thought, what is going on? The movie better answer my questions. I mean, it made her young, but like okay, that happened in the beginning of the film with no context whatsoever. Thanks. And also how the goat, if the goat really was possessed by Satan or not, or if it was just under the influence of the witch, kind of like how the bunny was earlier in the film. That question wasn't really resolved, and Anthony's okay with that. He's like, oh, that's fine. It was still true to the times and a very visually authentic movie, which was basically his review. And in my opinion, that is not even a review. It was just talking about the movie and then relating it to other movies that he's seen. So then I moved on to my second reviewer, James Baran, James Berardinelli. James Berardinelli. He's a film critic as well who didn't like the film. And I felt like he was more focused on the movie itself than Anthony was. He says that there's uneven screenplay, which there is. A lot of scenes that you can't quite follow, and it may be because of the language, but there's also elements that they just straight up drop. Like, for instance, the son in the movie looks at his sister in a lustful way, which was an element that was dropped a quarter way through the movie, and was never acknowledged with again. Every modern horror trope. So yes, you got the family, an isolated area, the dark, scary woods, supernatural forces, the high-pitched screeching of the musical score, the raising moans of the chorus, the singers. James also wrote that it's very slow-paced and is a very low scare quotient, which means there's not many raw scares, there's not many jump scares, but there's a lot of creepy moments. And then what he pointed out, the last scene was so overdone that it was laughable. Okay, so those were my two professional reviewers. You can see that one, or at least in my opinion, the second one that was more critical of the movie uh, reviewed the actual movie, whereas the first one was more talking about the elements within the movie that were good, like the characters in the time period. But that's all Anthony really talked about was the characters in the time period, and didn't even talk about the events in the movie. Barely. He did, but barely. Uh, the average moviegoers are the ones I mostly relate to. Our first one is from Margarita S. She asked the exact same question I did, which is, what am I missing? Surely there has to be some sort of element or elements that we're missing in this movie that causes people to give them high reviews. Another question she had was WTF. There's a lot of WTF moments, and they're not the good WTFs like, oh man, WTF is happening. You know, it's more like, what is happening in this movie? That was one average average moviegoer review. Another one was Devin E. He says this is more like a thriller movie than a horror movie, which I agree. It's not very scary, but it's got sort of a creep factor to it. And just to go on with that, he says it's not on par with other horror movies, which is true. A main word between me and the average moviegoers was boring. Overall, this movie was just boring. So, those are my 4 reviewers. As you can see, very different kinds of tastes. I felt like the average reviewers were much more down to earth and easier to relate to. And the professional critics, they had a sort of language. You could tell that they were trained to look at certain elements within a film and be able to critique them. So, was there any kind of strong consensus, I assume, between what the reviewers were saying? Not really. The ones who didn't like it were saying that it's very boring, and the ones that did like it say that it was very authentic and true to character development and the biblical references and the supernatural, things like that. But who is right? Well, according to Hume, from what I got from the reading, there's no really right and wrong to taste. The beautiful remains in the mind. It is, how you say, in the eye of the beholder. It is not objective. So we can't be wrong on tastes. We can have different tastes, but we can't be wrong about our tastes. So here are some final follow-up questions, and I'll end the video because I know it's getting long. Does a good movie critic possess any special expertise or specifically cultivated tastes that you could put label or labels to? Yes, definitely. I can tell that they both have a background in film, and they know what they're talking about when critiquing certain elements or talking about certain elements of the film. Very detailed, structured, easy to follow elements in the film. Whereas the average moviegoers, they were saying things like, "Oh, this is the most boring film ever," but they wouldn't really tell us why the film was boring. The experts knew how to articulate that. Okay, I think that pretty much covers everything. So thank you so much for sitting through this longer than average video, but I knew there was too much to talk about to fit into a shorter than 8-minute video. So thank you again. My name is Alan Marshall, and I will see you next time.